So it is a system of identifying, labeling, and then segregating human beings based on beliefs and practices that are well known to be harmful, that are well known now to be scientifically baseless, and are well known to be producing all kinds of inequities in our communities and as a nation.
It's Taj.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? It's Manuel and your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher here in the Los Angeles area, in Pasadena, California to be exact. And this, of course, is All the Above, your place for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our world of education. Shout out to anybody that might be joining us for the very first time. And shout out to those of you who are part of the AOTA family who's been with us for a long time. We're available, of course, on YouTube and all your podcast streaming apps and all that good stuff. But whatever you're using, if you appreciate these conversations we're having, just take a moment, please, and give us that 5 stars or thumbs up or whatever. And in fact, Jeff, if it were up to me, I would give a 5 stars just for that excellent intro that you always do, hitting that note when you're like, and welcome. Like that's you know what I'm saying? I just want to give you some props on that, man, because, you know.
What the audience doesn't know is that literally we just got done talking on our first take this morning about how I need to start doing vocal warm-ups because I can't hit the high notes, man. It's it's a little exercise in like how much like a 14-year-old can I sound like every episode. So I need to start drinking tea and honey. Doing some some la 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 get my stuff together here before we just jump right into the deep end. So for any music teacher fans out there, if you got any tips for me, please pass them my way. I could use it for our opening stanza of the show.
Well, I think you do a wonderful job, Jeff. And it's been a few years now of you hitting that note at the beginning of every single episode. So, I appreciate that. I appreciate you for that. But yeah, here we are, another full episode of All the Above. And this is around the time of year where a lot of folks are either about to start their spring break or are already in their spring break or already finished their spring break. I know mine is a week from now. So any of y'all who are either approaching or enjoying your spring break this year, shout out to you, whether classroom teacher, administrator, everybody involved in education, because this has been a year. This has been a year. And unfortunately, I think pretty much every year is going to be one of these just very challenging years because that's the world we live in nowadays. But Jeff, man, any plans for spring break? Anything exciting going on?
Well, I have to say, Manuel, so here in LAUSD, the primary district that I work with, we have about 2 weeks left until spring break. And so, this March stretch it's a stretch for people, right? You got a full President's Day to spring break, no breaks, and just grinding. So yes, my heart goes out to everybody. Let's finish strong. And I will say this is yet another one of those moments where I have to remind you and our audience that unfortunately I am a 12-month employee. I shouldn't say unfortunately. I like my job and I appreciate my job. Fortunately, I have a wonderful job and I don't have off school breaks, Manuel. I have a certain number of vacation days a year and we close on federal holidays and that kind of thing. So I might use some time during that week because, of course, it is a convenient time to take some time off while schools are closed. But it also is a convenient time to actually get a bunch of work done because, you're not getting dozens and dozens or hundreds of emails every day because school folks like yourself are on vacation, chilling at home as they should, as they deserve. And it can be a good chance to get caught up, to take a nice, full hour lunch break, things that are otherwise unheard of in the life of a busy educator. So I have not yet decided what exactly I'm doing that week, but I think I might take a day or two. Maybe I'll try and do a Monday, Friday joint that week and get 2 long weekends on either end. So we'll see. But no big plans for me as of yet. But stay tuned, folks.
Well,
I'll keep you posted.
What I'm hearing is that Mr. Super Duper Principal Leader Man doesn't need any breaks because he works all year, 12 months, no break, grit, bootstraps, meritocracy. Let's do it. See, folks?
There it is.
Grind culture, alive and well, alive and well.
That's exactly what I meant. If the system works, if it's not working for you, the problem is you. That's what I meant to say. Yeah.
There we have it. All right. So, full agenda for this episode. Of course, those of you who've been with us for a minute know that our full episodes have super dope guests and a look at multiple headlines. So, Jeff, what is on today's agenda?
Well, Manuel, I will just say we got a good one for everybody, as usual. And, I feel like every time I do this intro to a guest, it feels like I'm like, we got such an amazing guest and that it feels like repetitive, except yet again, we have such an amazing guest coming on the show. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep the streak going here. Another super dope guest joining all the above. And today's guest is special for a bunch of reasons. First of all, he's a brilliant educator. He is a person with a long background in teacher education, training teachers to become quality practitioners in the classroom. Not coincidentally, a former trainer of teachers for none other than your favorite all-the-above co-hosts, Dr. Manuel Rustin and Jeffrey Garrett, way back when we were just baby teachers in Boston trying to figure out, how to write on the chalkboard or whatever. Our guest today was an instructor in our teacher ed program. He has since gone on to do many other things, author, scholar, writer. He is currently the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for an organization called KnowledgeWorks, where he and they are doing a bunch of advocacy work, policy sort of work, culture shift kind of work, specifically focusing on issues around detracking education, right? So removing some of the stratification and barriers we have in place for things like honors and AP courses, for gifted and talented programs, and really advocating for a personalized learning, competency-based learning approach as the alternative to our traditional systems of tracking and creating stratified, homogeneous schools and classrooms. So really fascinating topic, Manuel, because this is one of those things where, honestly, you and I don't necessarily agree. And I don't even know if I fully agree with myself on this issue. And Eric definitely doesn't agree with me. So I think I didn't even actually introduce our guest yet. His name is Eric Toshalis, Dr. Eric Toshalis. Sorry to bury the lead there. But just a brilliant guy, really fascinating educator. And I think he's going to come drop some knowledge, challenge me on my, on this aspect of my thinking that is probably one of the most conservative perspectives that I have, if I dare say such a thing. But it's going to be fascinating, folks. You're definitely going to want to engage with us on this important conversation. So stick around. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Yeah, going to be a very dope conversation. And of course, folks know up first we have our Do Now, where we take a look at headlines in the world of education. Today's Do Now, we're taking a look at a story about money and another story about incarceration. Money and incarceration. How American. All right, folks.
Very American.
Indeed. Our Do Now up next. Stay tuned. All right, folks. Now it's time for today's Do Now. Jeff, how are we going to do the Do Now today?
All right, Manuel. We're going to jump in. And today's format, Manuel, as a person who in our last full episode, I believe we talked extensively about my deep love and faith in our systems of data-driven instruction. And we must know that any good, impactful, purposeful system of data-driven instruction, Manuel, starts with a rich, authentic assessment. So in the spirit of that, today, Manuel, we have a pop quiz.
Okay. I'm not mad at the pop quiz, but that data-driven instruction part, I don't know about that. We talked about that last episode, folks. If you missed that, go back.
That was the episode where I told you that working. Just about everything you said was wrong. It was that episode, I think. Yes.
All right. Well, what's the first quiz question for today, Jeff?
All right, Manuel. First question today is, what is better than having $121 billion?
Ooh. I guess being a troll on Twitter and infusing yourself in conversations that you shouldn't be part of. We're talking about Elon Musk here, right? I assume that's what we're talking about.
We are not talking about Elon Musk. I thought you were going for your girl Candace Owens, who
121 billion. I know she's getting paid, but hopefully she ain't getting paid that much.
That Russian oligarch money is good, man.
Yeah, man. Damn.
Yeah, maybe not that much though. Yeah. So the answer to this question, Manuel, is of course $122 billion. Okay, which is just like the $122 billion that has been allocated to go to America's public schools in the 2021 American Rescue Plan passed by Congress and proposed by President Biden that has funneled huge new sums of cash to America's public schools. And so we have an article today we're going to dig into, Manuel, that gives us some potentially surprising or maybe even alarming or maybe totally fine news about just how much or how little of that $122 billion is actually being spent by America's K-12 public school systems. So let's get into it here, Manuel. This article comes to us from LA School Report by some good writing by Linda Jacobson. So shout out to Linda Jacobson. And the American Rescue Plan, which of course was signed into law a year ago, March 11th, 2021, provided an unprecedented $122 billion for K-12 schools to reopen and rapidly respond to troubling learning and social emotional deficits that students face as a result of the pandemic. The law contains a September 2024, so roughly 3-year deadline for districts and education agencies to obligate those funds, meaning assign them to an expense and process it. However, due to the escalating costs of materials, supply chain delays, labor shortages, etc., less than half of the members of the American Association of School Administrators, which is the sort of national professional association for superintendents and school system leaders, less than half of them report being on track to meet that cutoff date in 2024, according to a survey taken in March by that organization. Experts are skeptical that the Biden administration would extend the deadline, fearing that if they did so, they would be faced with questions over whether an extension undermines the original purpose of the legislation, which was to address an emergency. Marguerite Rosa, executive director of the Edunomics Lab at Georgetown University, added, quote, "No one wants to open up that law again because it was not bipartisan. Democrats passed the relief bill using a process known as reconciliation that didn't require any Republican votes." Rosa, who argues that addressing learning loss needs to be districts' top priority, added that extending the deadline for things like construction projects would only draw attention to how officials are using the funds for non-academic reasons. Now, U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona said recently, "I want to make sure that we see now masks are off and things are starting to look normal, that we do not lose our sense of urgency around not only the gaps that existed before, but the gaps that have been made worse by the pandemic." Thomas Toke, director of Future Ed, explained that just because districts are obligating the funds doesn't mean they won't struggle to fill positions or face backlogs in building materials. His center's analysis showed that rural and high poverty districts are more likely to direct relief funds toward long-standing deferred maintenance and capital expenditures. So, Dr. Rustin, we have a huge influx of cash, $122 billion, going on top of the existing funding to America's public school systems. And America's public school systems are having trouble spending that money, at least on pace with when they have to spend that money by 2024. So I think there's a high likelihood that a lot of people might look at this story and be like, what the hell is wrong with these educators? They're always talking about you need more money, and now we give you more money and you can't spend it. So Manuel, what say you? How should we understand this story, this conundrum here?
Yeah, well, this is that rare problem in education, the rare problem of actually having money to spend. Not very often that we have the money to spend, and here we have it. And for me, I think one of the major problems here is that this is sort of like the confluence of like decades and decades of underserving and underfunding and defunding our schools, and having schools, especially those who serve in the most marginalized communities, struggle with like the basics of like materials and facilities upkeep and all that. And then you have this sudden influx of cash that is ostensibly to address like an immediate global crisis of the pandemic. And it's like, okay, so some expect that this money needs to be spent quickly, or on paper, it does need to be spent quickly by, I think, 2024. And yeah, because it's supposed to address an immediate need. But on the other hand, there are these long existing needs that cannot be fully separated from the immediate needs. Like you can't really detangle decades and decades of systemic underfunding from the immediate problems that schools face in terms of addressing this pandemic. So for example, students really need a lot more mental health support. They need more counselors, they need more therapists. We need a robust system of support for students. We needed that before the pandemic. We really did. We need it even more now. So yes, we need some of that funding to be directed towards that. However, we haven't really established like a robust pipeline of folks coming into schools in those positions. So in some areas, there's a shortage of folks available to hire and to bring in. And also this money is temporary. Like this is a quick cash influx. So how long will those positions even be there for? Are we just going to solve like the mental health crisis in a few years? So there's that problem of long-standing problems mixed with the immediate concerns of the pandemic and politicians' expectation that like, hey, we gave you this money, do something with it. You're always complaining about not having money. So here's the money, do something. And districts kind of struggling to not just decide how to best spend it, but actually like get rolling on that, because some of these problems that they're trying to address have been problems for so long. And it takes a long time to, for example, address like facilities issues and get the bids out and all that stuff. Plus you have all the inflated costs around supply chain shortages and all that stuff. So it's a problem. It's a problem. This reminds me of something I saw on television when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I used to watch a lot of 2020 and Dateline and those type of like, I forget what they're called, but those type of shows as a kid. I don't know why, but I remember they had an episode, and it really pains me to even remember this, but there was an episode where the basic question was, what would happen if we just gave a whole bunch of cash to a homeless person? Like, would they be able to like figure their way out of poverty? And I remember in this episode, they gave, I think it was like $20,000 or something to a man who was living on the street. And long story short, like, It didn't save him, Jeff. That influx of cash didn't save him, because it turns out it's not just the immediate cash need. It's also these long-standing challenges that landed him in that position in the first place. And all the cash in the world can't just solve all the problems that you're facing. So this kind of reminds me of that. Like folks will point to this and be like, see, schools have always complain about not having enough money. Here's the money, and they can't seem to figure out what to do with it or how to spend it. And what the hell? Maybe they didn't need the money. Maybe that's just an excuse. And it's like, actually, this is way more complicated than that. And it's just, it's one of those. I guess it's good that we have the problem of money to spend, but the expectation that it can be spent really quickly to address needs right away, I don't think that's a very realistic expectation. I know I'm in the classroom every single day. I see needs right in front of my face. I know there are immediate needs. I also know that the system doesn't work that quickly. And I also know that schools are really juggling with like all the different needs that they have and how best to spend this money in a way that fits with the constraints of the timetable for spending it, but also addresses problems in a way that will like have lasting impact, not just some fly by night, quick little, okay, we had this cool little tutoring thing for like 6 months and then the money ran out. So now what are we going to do? So I think it's much more complex than folks outside of education would believe it to be. But all that being said, I also know that many districts are not doing a very good job of actually communicating with their classroom teachers and their campus staff about how to spend this money. I honestly don't know what my district is doing with whatever money they got. Maybe they have sent out information. They might have even sent surveys out. I don't remember. Every day is so intense. Every day is so intense. If they've communicated to me, a classroom teacher, what the plan is, I miss that in the litany of like notifications and all the craziness that I get in my inbox every single day related to just like just how difficult the day-to-day operations of schooling, of teaching and learning are right now. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think your observations were very, very smart there. And one of the things that I think people most misunderstand, in particular about how we fund education in this country, and this might be true in other aspects of like sort of public services that the government funds. I don't, I'm not an expert in social work or in other fields to know if this is definitively true. But for sure, in education, we do these temporary infusions of cash into the system with the hopes that like this is gonna make schools improve, and we're gonna call it school improvement grants, and we're gonna give you research-backed intervention programs to implement, and then everything's gonna be great, and all the kids will be proficient by 2014. Or, this sort of a model, right? And this happens both with government funding and also in government funding that comes in response to some sort of crisis, usually a lawsuit from, the ACLU or some kind of civil rights organization. And then they end in a settlement that says, okay, for the next 3 years, we're going to do this thing for this set of schools and give them a bunch of money. But then it goes away after 3 years, right? And so what that does, like imagine you're budgeting for your family, right? And someone came to you and said, all right, we're going to give you this big infusion of cash, but it's only going to be around for 3 years, right? What are you going to be able to do with that cash, right? Yeah. You're going to be very limited in a certain sense. You're not going to be able to say, buy a new car, right? Because the payments, the financing for your car is 5-year financing, right? So like you can't buy the car because you're not going to be able to pay for it after the 3 years. Or maybe you can only lease the car and then you have to give it back after 3 years, right? You're not going to be able to buy a new house because you're not going to have a 3-year mortgage on a house, right? So you're very limited in this, imperfect analogy here in what schools can fund. And the reality is some of the biggest things that schools need most are positions and facilities, right? And facilities take a long time to build, right? And especially with all these supply chain issues, like you folks out there know if you're ordering stuff from Home Depot or Amazon or whatever, like there's supply chain issues trying to get like a new backpack or something, right? Let alone trying to build a new school building or a new gym or a new auditorium or a new library or things of that nature, right? Then there's the positions issue. Right now, across the country, we've reported extensively on this show for years, Manuel, about how we have a teacher shortage and an educator shortage, generally speaking. But we especially have one now that there's been a bit of an exodus from the profession that has continued and maybe been exacerbated a little bit by the pandemic, and a continued shortage of supply of new teachers coming into the profession, right? And so at the same time as we're saying like, oh, we recognize there's going to be big social and emotional needs from our students. We're going to need more social workers. We're going to need more counselors. We're going to need more, staff who can focus on marginalized populations in school and provide, mentoring and support for them. I'll just give one example. The district I work with most here at Los Angeles Unified literally has thousands of vacancies right now that they can't fill. Not because they don't either have the position posted or don't have the money to pay for the position, but because there aren't enough people to do the job, right? And like maybe there's some critique you could offer and say like, well, the district should do a better job with recruitment or, maybe, but also there's still thousands of these positions that are vacant and there's just not enough people to do the work, right? So even in the sense of big infusions of cash that allow us to do the things we've wanted to do. Hey, we need more folks who can do restorative justice kind of work in schools. Let's create new restorative justice teacher positions. We have to have people we can hire, right? And so that also takes multiple years, right, to happen, right, to expand the graduates of teacher education programs in our states and nationwide. So I think there's both a totally understandable perspective here from folks that would say, hey, look, we gave you all this money, you didn't even spend it. How does that square with the idea that you're telling us you need all this money? That's fair, and you have to understand it in context, right? Which is you put all these strings on the money that don't allow us to actually make long-term thinking decisions that would be beneficial to addressing the more systemic needs that we have. And we have lived in the not too recent past through plenty of eras where schools and districts fell off a fiscal cliff because of temporary infusions of federal dollars, and they actually did things like, all right, we're going to hire a bunch more staff, we're going to reduce class sizes in our schools, or we're going to, add more programming, or, establish career tech pathways, or these sorts of things. But then when that funding dries up, you're like, okay, we can't sustain this program. We have to cut all these programs, which is both destabilizing to school staffs and communities, and frankly, can be harmful to kids, right? To strip away adults that they come to rely on and trust. So I think there's a systemic issue behind how we fund schools, man, that we've got to address. Like, let me just give you one little final tidbit here, Manuel. $122 billion sounds like a lot, right? You know what else Congress did in 2021, Manuel? Gave the Pentagon, okay, the U.S. Department of Defense, $765 billion, okay? $765 billion in a year where ostensibly we ended, ended the war in Afghanistan, brought the troops home, right? Theoretically, okay? Have ended, theoretically, the war in Iraq, okay? We're supposed to not be at war, and we just gave this one aspect of our defense and military complex $765 billion. Now, the military is a large institution in this country, Manuel, but I guarantee you, if you stack up all of the teachers, TAs, secretaries, plant managers, principals, assistant principals, if you stack up public school as a public entity collectively, I guarantee you it's orders of magnitude larger than the military. And so we have plenty of money in this country to spend all we want on public education, and to do so not in 3-year increments, but to say, you know what, if we give the Pentagon $765 billion every year, we can give education more than $122 billion for 3 years. Okay, so that schools can say, hey, we're going to build a nice new school building for the kids, or we're going to hire permanent staff and keep them forever because our kids are going to need counselors and librarians forever, right? So there's a systemic issue here, I think, that is perhaps easily missed when talking about this.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And beware the profiteers. Since you're mentioning money spent on military, we know whenever there's a war, or even when there's not war, a lot of that money goes to contractors and other folks who just jump in and get the profit from the money being available around this conflict. And I do hope districts are being cognizant of some of the folks who might be jumping in with opportunities to train their staff on this, that, whatever, and grab some quick cash from this influx of money, who might not necessarily be very good or any good at those trainings or whatever services they might be selling. So do beware the profiteers who show up when the money is there and available. All right, Jeff, that's just the first quiz question. We have one more. And this one, let's see if you know this one. Jeff, do you know what a final delivery station is?
Final delivery station. It sounds like when I'm really frustrated and I'm trying to figure out where my package is that I ordered from Amazon, and they send me a very unhelpful email that has a 27-character code for order number XJY29786 and some kind of barcode, but not the name of what I ordered or a picture of what I ordered. And they're like, your order is in Toledo. And then they're like, your order is at its final delivery station. And I'm like, I don't know what this means. Just send me my order. That's I think what we're talking about here. Final delivery station, right?
Now, that is the second time you've mentioned Amazon already during this do now. It sounds like you and Alexa have some conversations to be had, because yeah, man, I sensed some frustration there between you and Alexa. But in any case, that might also be a final delivery station. In this case, a final delivery station in the sense of the end of pipelines. So of course, pipelines transport materials, maybe fuel, maybe oil, across long distances, and that pipeline ends somewhere, and that's where it gets delivered to the consumer. And in this case, when we're talking education and we're talking pipelines, that pipeline, that final delivery station, often is the prison system. And this is a story here about juvenile youth So youngsters who are in juvenile facilities and the type of education that they receive, at least here in Los Angeles County. So we've talked a lot about a lot of different issues in education, a lot of different populations in education. And I don't think we've spoken very much about education within juvenile halls. So this is a story that I think is pretty interesting in terms of some of the parallels and some of the differences we see between schools inside of juvenile facilities and schools that you and I work with a little more often. So this comes to us. Actually, I got an email from the LA County Board of Supervisors about this report, but I went over to EdSource, who I knew would have an article about it because that's what they do. They stay up on the latest news in education. And Betty Marquez Rosales wrote up a story about this report that details a citizen's review of education offered to youth in Los Angeles juvenile facilities. Now, it's a 14-page report, and it presents observations, findings, and recommendations based on months of classroom observations and interviews with staff, students, and education advocates in the Los Angeles County Office of Education juvenile court schools. Now, the report offers 4 key findings, which it explains through individual anecdotes and overall observations. And of course, we'll link the report below this. But in any case, their findings include that most classrooms lack a culture of learning. The quality of instruction is generally far below expectations. Staffing of classrooms creates barriers to learning. And a few on-site school leaders exhibited the ability and intent to improve instruction. Now, the report states, quote, the attitude of most students was either apathetic or antagonistic towards learning activities. Most teachers seemed to believe that the minimal work that they provided was the best that could be reasonably expected of these students. Now, as for why students appeared so apathetic, the report attributes student resistance primarily to the carceral setting and poor and inconsistent classroom instruction. It reads, quote, the structure of the program and practices of the teachers make it clear that avoiding disruptions and going through the motions is what is genuinely valued, end quote. Some recommendations in the report include to empower effective principals, teachers, and youth to collaborate with each other and the public to lead site-specific improvement efforts, to integrate arts, cooperative learning, project-based learning, and cultural relevance into classroom instruction, and to take better advantage of low staff-to-student ratios in the lesson planning. Now, the report is based on observations of a 4-person committee that was done over a course of 5 months. And to be fair, the superintendent of the County Office of Education, Deborah Duardo, says that, quote, these findings are not based on facts, but on speculation and conjecture. So, Jeff, somewhat rare, I think rare, look into education, into schools within the juvenile facilities, the juvenile court system here in Los Angeles County. And I want to know what some of your thoughts were upon reading the findings in this report.
Yeah, Manuel, fascinating story. And I have kind of conflicting feelings about this story, to be honest, because on the one hand, I feel like just very confident that what this report is naming is probably very true about the kind of state of despair of public education as it exists in youth lockup facilities here in California, and frankly, probably everywhere. I'm certainly not an expert at public schooling that takes place behind bars in this country, but let's, make no mistakes about it. Like, the most dehumanizing places that exist in the United States of America are detention facilities, right? Prisons, juvenile halls, immigration detention camps, like where we are incarcerating people and essentially herding them like cattle and, treating them like, some sort of second-class indentured servant slave kind of condition, right? These are awful places, frankly. And to try to mesh that setting with the nature of what public education should be, I think is a monumental task, right? Like, there was a line in the article that said something in a critical way of the schools that, like, well, the kids, they don't seem like they're engaging in a love of learning. They're just here because they want to graduate from high school. And there's part of me that says, like, yes, of course, in any school, it should be a very sad thing to have students not experiencing joyful learning. And on the other hand, they're in frickin' prison, man. Like, it's not a joyful place. And the goal, the inspirational stuff is like, how do I get out of here and get my life in a place where I can, when I can hopefully not come back here, right? Because chances are I didn't wind up here because I had a really calm, stable, well-supported life at home, right? Chances are I'm here because of some kind of traumatic situation that I experienced as a young person that was very likely no fault of my own and got me caught up in some BS, and now I am here, right? In this system that is controlling, brutalizing, dehumanizing, right? Where I'm in physical danger on a regular basis, where there's abusive conduct from law enforcement officers, right? And like, I'm sure there's some good people in the system doing their best to try to bring some humanity to it. But like, this is the nature of what we're talking about, folks. Like, we ain't gonna have cuddly, huggy, lovey-dovey school behind bars. I'm sorry, I just don't know that that's realistic. And the fact that students would be like, look, I'm here to get my diploma, makes sense to me, right? That like, getting that educational advancement is a very concrete, practical, like, when I get out, how am I gonna feed myself, right? When I get out, how am I gonna be able to earn money and have housing so I'm not homeless and having to rob people and wind up back here, right? Or someplace worse. And getting a high school diploma is a huge step in that direction, right? Could be the difference between making minimum wage and making something that gives you at least a little bit more that you can help provide for your family in some way, or, something of that nature. So, there's a part of it to me, Manuel, that reads a little bit like, yeah, we can crap on that aspect of the school system, but also like, the problem here is maybe the carceral system. Not that like we just don't have good enough schools behind bars. Okay. We probably also need better school behind bars. Let's be real. Okay. I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I can imagine it needs to be much better. And this report certainly gives us a lot of food for consideration about what that could look like. But I think, to the extent we want to solve there's not enough joyful inspiration in this environment. Yeah, well, maybe we need an alternative to youth prisons. Okay.
Yeah.
That might be the conversation that isn't being had in this piece.
Yeah, no, I agree with you right there. I mean, these are 13, 14, 15-year-olds, 16, maybe a few 17-year-olds. We know in California they like to push the 17 and 18-year-olds up in the system. So, this is just so sad. So sad to read about this. I've had several students who, pop up during the school year who just got released from a facility like this. And usually I have zero context as to what their history was in terms of if they had any classes in there, what classes they had, how they ended up at my school of all schools. Like, I've never gotten any context, and I've always felt so sad for them, because obviously adolescence is so difficult already, and whatever conditions that these young folks were experiencing before they went into the system, I imagine weren't great. And then the system itself, like reading about these classrooms, I guess I'm not surprised at all, because it's pretty much kind of how I pictured a lot of classes being in juvenile facilities, just like, worksheets and simple activities and not much more beyond that. So I guess I'm not surprised, but it just makes me so sad, because these folks are so young and have obviously the whole world, the whole future ahead of them. And to not have that loving atmosphere that you just alluded to, not having a sort of school that actually meets their needs, is just it's just really heartbreaking. And obviously, if we even just look at it in a number sense, obviously the last story we're talking about budgets and numbers, like, these are folks who, like, if we don't help them, that it's only going to cost the entire system so much more, because they're going to be in and out. Like the students that I have had in my history as a regular high school teacher come out of the system and enter my class, they normally didn't stay on our campus for very long. one that comes to mind, he was like right back in the system pretty quickly.
Yeah.
We failed to meet his needs, and it's just like, it's going to cost you on the back end when these folks are in and out and continuing to like not find a loving, stable place in society. So some of the recommendations in there, to me, I'm like, hell yeah, like we need that in schools. Like the parallels between what was reported in this story and what we see in certain schools, the parallels are like just so stark, like low expectations for students not seeing the value in what's being taught, recommendations that we have more arts, we have more lessons around culture and around awareness and around criticality and all that. Like, yes, we need that everywhere. And the justice system, the juvenile court system is no exception. So yeah, man, just really makes me sad for those kids, man.
Yeah, 100%, man. And I think you're right. I hope I didn't give in my comments there the impression that like I don't think those students deserve that kind of education.
Oh no, you didn't. But I'm sure nobody listening, I don't think would think that either. But I'm sure folks who saw this story were like, well, they shouldn't have been a gangbanger. Right. That's what they get. No. Like, I'm sure, obviously, there's folks out there that think that.
Yeah. Well, so to those folks, let me just say one quick thing in closing.
Oh, they ain't listening to our show, but go ahead.
Well, to anyone who even might have like a little voice in the back of your head that's like, well, I don't know, is this really like, of all the things we can care about in education, is this the priority, right? And I think there is that type of mindset or thinking also reflects some of the ways in which we just write certain groups of people off and dismiss people, right? When you look at the other side of the coin, like who are the kids who are incarcerated in this country, Manuel? And I'm sorry, I don't have the actual data to cite right offhand, but I've have some familiarity with data on this issue, man, and it is overwhelming the percentage of those students who were formerly students in special education, who were students who came out of the children who grew up in the foster care system, children who experienced chemical dependency issues, right, and got caught up in the criminal justice system because of substance abuse and mental health issues. LGBTQ kids who are, kicked out of their house and have to resort to, to illegal means in order to figure out a way to survive in the world, right? Folks who are engaging in sex work or other kinds of things like that, right? Like these are the people, by and large. It's not just like your neighbor's kid who's like a bad seed who robs people or whatever. Like that's not who's filling the youth prisons in this country. And we're talking about young people who have had a real hard go at life because of the ways our system has failed them. And they might be, angry and rough around the edges and hard to deal with in some ways, right? But like these are folks who have been the most marginalized among the marginalized, right? And so to then turn around and offer them incarceration and crappy schooling, right, just perpetuates that cycle that you were naming there. And that certainly parallels what I saw, in my years as an educator as well, like kids who came in and out, right, of the system. And anyone with eyes can see how this system perpetuates itself. And this, I think speaks volumes about the work we have to do to interrupt these kind of cycles.
Yeah, man. For sure. And actually, this has, I guess, nothing to do with what you just said there, but I'm just thinking about my school and my experience having had so many students pop up during the school year who are fresh out of some juvenile facility. That hasn't happened in a while. And I don't know if to attribute that to the gentrification that's happening in the city that I teach in or something else, but it hasn't happened in a while. So I do wonder how the dynamics of all of this are changing as we see the housing crisis that we talked about, I think last episode or the episode before, push more and more families out and away from city centers. And just in any case, man, it's not a California problem by itself. As you said, these findings probably could have been found in juvenile facilities across the country. I certainly have never heard of juvenile facilities that were doing awesome in the world of education. So yeah, man, just we definitely have to do better by our young people because they deserve better for sure. So, all right, folks, that was it for today's Do Now. Money and prison bars. Again, Very American, very American. So let's talk about tracking. All right, we're going to shift gears here and bring on a super dope guest, Dr. Eric Toshalis, to talk about the sorting and categorizing of students based on their maybe ability, maybe not, as they get shifted into gifted and talented or AP or something other, and the dynamics of that and all that. So that's in our seminar coming up next. Stay tuned.
All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar, and thanks so much for joining us today. We are just absolutely thrilled to have with us a fantastic guest, Dr. Eric Toshalis, whose resume and accomplishments we'll get to in just a moment, but I think it's important also to call out that today's episode represents, I think, the first time that the three of us have been back in a shared space since about 2003, when yours truly and Dr. Manuel Rustin were just baby teachers trying to figure out how to plan a lesson and how to manage a classroom, and benefiting from the wisdom, experience, and good teachings of folks like Dr. Toshalis, who are helping us in our teacher education program. So, Dr. Toshalis, welcome to All the Above.
Thank you, gentlemen. Psyched to be back in a space with you two. Just absolutely thrilled to see the kinds of leadership and the kinds of impact and the kind of things that you all have done with your careers, the kinds of dedication you have to kids and communities, and the conversations you're inspiring here. I'm honored to just be back in your circle of influence and psyched to hang out with you today. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, let's introduce you in a little more detail to our guest. Over the last 3 decades, Dr. Eric Toshalis has served as a public middle and high school teacher, a mentor teacher, a teacher union president, teacher educator, community activist, curriculum writer, researcher, and university professor. He is also an author who has lived and worked in the states of California, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Idaho. He has been recognized as Teacher of the Year by his school district in Santa Barbara County in 1997 and awarded the Certificate of Distinction in Teaching by Harvard College in 2002. Eric has long focused on what it takes to educate adolescents and adults who bring a diversity of cultural, ethnic, gender, linguistic, racial, sexual, and socioeconomic insights. He is the author of the award-winning book, Make Me, Understanding and Engaging Student Resistance in School, that came out in 2015, and is co-author of the widely used text, Understanding Youth, Adolescent Development for Educators in 2006, both published by Harvard Education Press. Eric received his BA teaching credential and master's from the University of California, Santa Barbara, his second master's from Harvard Divinity School, and his doctorate from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He has been an instructor at Harvard, a faculty member in the Department of Secondary Education at Cal State Channel Islands, and has served as director of a master's program at the Graduate School of Education and Counseling at Lewis and Clark College. Dr. Toshalis now serves as the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at KnowledgeWorks. Dr. Eric Toshalis, so great to have you on the show, and I'm going to kick it over to Manuel for the first question.
Yeah, Dr. Toshalis in the building. Man, it's been a very long time. I believe 18 years or so since I last saw you in the back of the classroom while I was student teaching, and you were filling out the little observation notes. And I don't know if you remember that, the carbon copy forms with your notes about my student teaching. I still have those. Very, very nice to see you again. Very blessed to have you on All of the Above. And today's topic is a real hot button issue around tracking. Now, before we launch the conversation, we thought it'd be worthwhile to get some clarity of language around tracking and what it is and how it manifests in our school. So I want to start by reading something that you wrote that's posted on KnowledgeWorks, and we'll put the link below. But in this piece, you wrote, quote, "When it comes to tracking, it's inaccurate to say inequity is a symptom. It's not really even an outcome. With tracking, inequity is a principle of design. The system is working as intended. That's why we need to dismantle it." Now, can you talk to us a little bit about exactly what you mean by tracking and how it shows up in our schools? And then maybe a little more clarity about this idea that inequity is a principle of design when it comes to tracking.
Appreciate that question. Yeah, it's good to get clear terms out in front. Tracking, also known as ability grouping, also known as streaming, as it's called in the UK and in Australia and New Zealand, those sorts of places. It's basically the practice of labeling, ranking, and sorting human beings based on their perceived capacity to perform in what is typically a narrowly defined set of contexts. It's typically based on reductive assessments that are widely known to be biased, and or it's based on teacher nomination procedures that play into racist categories of what and who is valued in school settings. So it is a system of identifying, labeling, and then segregating human beings based on beliefs and practices that are well known to be harmful, that are well known now to be scientifically baseless, and are well known to be producing all kinds of inequities in our communities and as a nation. It's also a fixed mindset infrastructure. It's a way of creating specific policies, practices, and procedures that are born of ideologies and practices that we know are damaging, but we retain them because they benefit those who most designed it and who most direct it today. It's also really rooted in factory models of education that sought to separate the captains of industry from those who would be valued basically only for their labor. And it's really, and we can talk more about the history of this, it's inextricable from eugenics and racist beliefs about which subpopulations are believed to carry really the greatest potential to be leaders versus all the others. And in my perspective, and I'm building on the scholarship and leadership of Jeannie Oakes with her book, Keeping Track, and then a follow-up Beyond Tracking, and Kevin Wellner at Boulder, and Daniel Lozen and Center X at UCLA, and a lot of stuff that they do, and all of the major professional organizations that support math educators, English language arts educators, science educators, social studies educators, all of which has public statements saying that we need to reduce and eliminate tracking in our schools. All of them are on board of it. The NEA is on board with that. The AFT is on that. AACTE for technical education. All of those folks are on the record as saying we need to get rid of tracking. And yet it's a primary mechanism dominating the way our schools are set up. And it's the way that the dominant minority uses or the way the dominant minority secures its unearned advantage. So I would argue that if we're going to really think about tracking honestly and clearly, we need to think not just about our own individual trajectories, although those stories are really important, but we need to think about the kinds of harms that it does in our communities and the logics that it's based on, and how much of that is just on shifting sands that we can no longer trust. It really, from a capitalist perspective, it's a way to ensure that schools produce an underclass of underprepared, unskilled, fearful, risk-averse, compliant laborers that keep wages low and profits high. In a capitalist economy, that's the way that it functions. And I know, and I believe, and I've seen that we can do better, particularly when we commit to getting rid of it, not just playing at the edges of it.
Yeah, Dr. Toshalis, you're speaking to my intellectual soul as you share those words there, and I am partly why I'm so grateful that you're here today. This is perhaps one of the main issues in education where I think Manuel and I differ in our opinion and perspective. And frankly, when I hear you say those things, it sounds right. It sounds sort of morally and philosophically right, and I want to agree. And yet, personally, and for many people I know, have had lived experiences with education where perhaps a different perspective on the issue has come from the path that we have walked. So, for example, in my case, I was a kindergarten student in a regular, traditional public school classroom. I was being, severely under challenged, let's just say, right? I came into school, I knew how to read, I, knew all my letters and shapes and sounds and whatever other sort of fundamental curriculum was in place in the school. And as a result, I was bored, very hyperactive child, and I got into a lot of trouble. Right, and was definitely on an educational path that was going to a very negative space. Now, we can definitely say lots about and agree about the sort of larger problem with that equation, but what happened in my educational trajectory was moving to a so-called gifted and talented magnet program where I was challenged with academic work, where I had peers who were also pushing me academically, and my entire experience as a student was transformed because of moving from an environment where I was not being challenged at all and not having my sort of needs and readiness for learning understood, respected, and responded to an environment where that was the default in every classroom setting that I moved into, and that resulted in me thriving as a very young person, as a student. And so I think there's maybe a tough question in there that I would love to get your perspective on here, which is, how would you respond to people like myself or others who would say not only that there is evidence all around us of tracking in this way, supporting many students, but also having in some ways like a liberatory aspect to it, particularly for folks of color or communities of color, where a lot of times those types of learning spaces were denied to folks. So how would you respond to that?
So a couple of things in the setup. Totally acknowledge the fact that gifted and talented education and that label and the access and the resources and the opportunities that were then provided to you after an unfulfilling experience were the kinds of pathways and pacing and the kind of thing that opened up doors for you. Totally understand that that's work. That's why those systems are set up that way. I do not believe, however, that gifted and talented education is a way to lift up BIPOC communities. It does the opposite. That you were an exception to the rule shows that what it creates within communities is a I'm going to get what's mine ethic, right? And that is not a justice strategy. That is a strategy for dividing communities and getting people to think that it's a zero-sum game that begins with the fact that your experience started in a classroom where the teacher was not supported enough or was not held accountable enough to provide differentiated possibilities for you to get enrichment and acceleration while staying in a heterogeneously grouped classroom. So the solution was, rather than to support teachers to do that across the system, was to create a little gate, gifted and talented education being literally a gate. Open that gate a squeak and let a couple of folks in to go in and do that while basically sustaining that system, which is designed to secure advantage for people who already have class privilege, race privilege, and all the other privileges that get associated with that. So I would argue that gifted and talented education is not a liberatory strategy. It never was. It wasn't designed to be that, and it doesn't function that way today. That there are little exceptions out there, and I would argue that your experience is an exception because behind you are thousands of other students who didn't get that extra thing. You can have a magnet school, but that doesn't change the fact that the system is operating without that magnet, without that attraction, without acceleration and enrichment for all. Gifted and talented education had as its origins, it started in Charlottesville, Virginia. And by Charlottesville, Virginia, I don't mean I mean that Charlottesville, the one that we know of from Unite the Right and where folks were killed in the street and all the nasty stuff that happened as a result of that. It started, GATE classes originated there right after the Brown v. Board decision forced the city to segregate, to integrate its schools, i.e. separate does not mean equal. In one article, there's a New York Times did a whole thing with ProPublica where they researched what happened there as the foundation. You can find it online. I can send you the link for it. But after decades of resisting court-ordered desegregation, Charlottesville school officials integrated their schools in the 70s, but they established a separate school within a school program, was essentially for white kids who had teacher nominations and test scores to be considered gifted. And they invented the term gifted in order to bestow, using a special education language and some of the stuff that was emerging at about that same time, to say we need a separate program for these poor kids who aren't getting what they need in the regular classrooms, excusing the fact that the teachers who were providing those instructions weren't ever supported to change what they were doing. Instead, they created a school within a school based on now disproven theories of intelligence, which ignore how we develop and how we grow as learners across the lifespan. This preserved a segregated system as it does today, and it excluded those who are always going to be best served and best inspired by the growth mindsets rather than fixed mindsets. including the leading mathematics educator in the United States, Joe Bowler at Stanford, who has long been showing for decades now how we can de-track mathematics classrooms to the benefit of all students, and it doesn't harm those at the highest levels, and there's research to support that. So the educational redlining and the opportunity hoarding that is GATE then spread like wildfire across the K-12 ed system, because all of the folks who were interested in not being in integrated schools found a way to keep a school within a school and sustain that disproportionality in outcomes that happens when we label some kids as gifted, as if you can test someone in the second grade that for their lifelong potential, right? Can we do that? I don't think we can, and should we? And it's based on white middle class norms about what is valued in school and what types of things we want to test on, as if a 7 or 8 year old can determine their lifelong potential at that point. And if you fast forward to today, you have an entrenched sector of families in most communities that expect their school to secure their kids and their families' advantage by labeling, ranking, and sorting their kids into the higher tracks. And then you get other folks, other families, even BIPOC families, who see that as a way up. And I get what's yours, but get what's mine and try to get that advantage is not a justice strategy. I want to underscore that. It is not. What that is a way to be divided. And we've seen that even in what's happening in San Francisco with the recent vote and the recall of candidates. We see huge racial divisions happening because of the way that some subpopulations believe that the way that they're going to sustain their advantage is through these accelerated programs that those kids, however you want to define that, aren't good enough to be in, but we are. That is a huge division that we should be troubling all the way through. And the way we trouble that is by troubling the assumptions that there is such a thing as giftedness, and there isn't. There is such a thing as genius, and there isn't. There is such a thing as talent that doesn't happen outside of support and access and opportunity and time and all of that. There isn't. And then we disturb those things and we destructure and destabilize those things so that we can actually create heterogeneous democratic classrooms that help all kids flourish. So I don't buy all of the premises, even though I acknowledge the fact that it indeed helped you, but it isn't a strategy to help communities.
Yeah, the history teacher in me loves that history lesson, looking back at the early era of GATE and its development and its role. And the in school or school within a school model, I'm thinking right now of 2 schools that I'm familiar with, not in my district, that do have within them an academy or an aspect of their school that you have to apply to get in and have these grades and have this and have that. And that is the segregated area of the school where the most advanced, quote unquote, advanced kids are. And they do not resemble the racial demographics of the rest of the school. And now those schools say they're in a position where, like, if they got rid of that school within a school, they would lose folks. Their parents would take their kids elsewhere, and that would have an impact on enrollment. So it's kind of just there and stuck there, and it's not going anywhere. Yep. And, you know, one of the difficulties in discussing tracking with folks, especially folks outside of education, or I should say folks who are not professional educators, is this idea that it seems like it's a welcome presence outside of school. So if you look at sports, we have JV, we have varsity, we have intramural sports. When you look at orchestra, when we look at just a host of other activities that people do across the country, we have a bit of tracking in terms of folks' actual talent level, skill level. And we don't look at those and say, oh, the fact that we have a JV and a varsity, or that we have intramural and JV is somehow oppressive or somehow inequitable. We kind of just seemingly agree that, like, oh yeah, you know, based on the student's skill level and talent level, they're ready for the next level of competition and they move on up. So how do we square the seemingly welcome presence of tracking in all these other areas with what you're saying here about the damaging and inequitable roots of tracking when it comes to academics?
Yeah, I hear you about that. People often trot out the whole, well, what about sports, or what about band, or what about this competitive program that we're putting these kids in, or whatever, all these extracurriculars that seem to function okay by pseudo labeling, pseudo ranking, pseudo sorting. And I'm going to say that's a huge conflation that doesn't stack up. So I'll start here. JV basketball is developmental. You can get on varsity if you practice and have time and have mentoring and have access and have a body that can do the things that you ask of it. Okay. We're fielding athletic teams to compete against other teams, and the objectives and the practices are used in that setting, and all extracurriculars are and should be different because those things are extracurriculars. They're not compulsory. It isn't ethical in compulsory education to label, rank, and sort kids away from opportunity. They're required by law to be there. Then why is the law setting it up so that some never get opportunities to be successful in post-secondary, much less be successful in secondary? JV is still an opportunity. It's not a dead end. You can get into varsity. You cannot tell me that the kids who are in remedial college prep are on a path to AP calculus and a path to secondary success. That is some serious BS. That is not going to happen. For most kids, those are not routes to success. Remediation and be put into those lower programs are not opportunities for them to get better and then get back into the mainstream or upper echelons of what's offered in the school. No, those are ruts. The ruts, not roots, right? Same with chairs and band, right? Like, let's say you go for first chair, but you get fourth chair. That's a marker of a skill in a very specific medium. The fourth chair can still become the first chair, right? Again, if they have the support, the time, the mentoring, access to resources, and all of those things. It's a form of assessment with a clear criteria to improve. They're not in fourth chair forever. They could move up if they had the proper context around them to do that. It doesn't excuse the harms that do come from such competitive models. I don't think that having chairs and band is fully innocent. And I don't think that JV basketball and varsity basketball is innocent of some of the problems that can come from those sorts of labels. But if you're a freshman and you're on JV, that's kind of where you should be, right? Like, you got a year or two. If you really you bring your game and maybe you get a little bit taller, and it's basketball, then maybe you can move into varsity, and coaches are constantly talking to you about what it's going to take to get varsity. And you can see the criteria to get there. Put a kid in algebra, in college prep algebra, not in the honors algebra or not in the AP track or whatever. People aren't saying this is what you need to get out of this. This is how you can get to those classes. No, they know that they're in a rut and they're not getting out of it. So the comparison falls down pretty quickly. It's very different goals, very different contexts with very different lifelong material effects. If you went out for JV basketball, okay, but you never made it to varsity, but you're still taking AP classes and college credit going classes, and you're in the higher echelon and you got the name gifted on the way there, you're going to be fine. But if you're playing varsity basketball, but you're in only remediation classes, doors are slamming shut in your face every single day for your life trajectory. So making those conflations, I can see that there's some easy logic there, but it doesn't stack up. We got to remember that the tracks that we establish for those kids do not lead them to post-secondary possibilities for middle-class sustaining careers. They lead to low-wage options and all sorts of mental health considerations that accrue as soon as you label somebody as being that kid is gifted, fixed mindset, and all the toxins that come with that. And that kid over there is ungifted and not talented. I want to say, and I know that you two would believe this, every single kid has a talent, a set of talents, and a host of gifts that are worth exploring and enhancing and challenging and improving. And a lot of kids, most kids, don't even know what they are yet. And to have those labeled and reduced so early in their life trajectories and to have material effects accrue to that labeling and ranking and sorting is dangerous, it's unethical, it's harmful, and it's not the same thing as JV basketball and chairs and band.
So something that you're making me think a lot about, Dr. Toshalis, is kind of the, so what do we do about it question, right? And from what I have seen through reading and just career experience with folks, is the primary solution that people drive to is one that says we need to create and preserve heterogeneous learning environments, and then the work of ensuring that students are receiving the right level of challenge, of supports, of push, and and that sort of thing is on the teacher, right? And most teachers operate alone in the classroom with, say, 25 to 35 youngsters in their care. And presents the teacher with a massive challenge to be able to differentiate, personalize, etc., to actually enact the kind of learning that I think I hear you implying. And so I'd love to kind of unpack this a little bit with you. And through some of your writing and seeing some of your work, you have advocated for personalized learning, competency-based learning as really being sort of the perhaps one of the primary modes of instruction that needs to be enacted in schools in order for us to bring to life a more equitable, more anti-racist pedagogy and set of practices in schools that can address the very many concerns you've raised about our system of tracking. And again, I would say that sounds great, but what does that actually look like in terms of implementation? How do we, in the system that we have, or the resources that we have in our systems, how do we actually enact that, bring that to life in our K-12 systems?
Straight up, great question. Love it, because you're thinking about okay, let's just say for the second that I agree with what you're saying, but I'm still going to chew on it, Toshalis. I hear you. I'm going to chew on it a little bit. But let's say for the sake of agreement that I agree with what you're saying. Now show me what it looks like to make that stuff happen in the actual systems. And that's the appropriate question for anyone who's in a position of leadership such as yourself to ask, and I'm glad you asked it. So I would say, first thing, just about my own location in the field, I am essentially an evangelist for competency-based education, what we at KnowledgeWorks call personalized competency-based learning. But the field also calls mastery-based learning and proficiency-based learning, and it has a lot of different terms depending on where you go. But I'm an evangelist for it, not because I work for a foundation and a nonprofit that does that work. I'm an evangelist for it because I have been in a bunch of classrooms with very, very credit-seeking 19-year-old homeless, speech impediment, student of color who's also gender fluid, who's trying to, in a credit recovery program, sitting down next to that student for an hour and then another 45 minutes in another class, and following him and just engaging that student and saying, how do you know, what are you doing today? How do you know what you need to do? And what are you working on? And what are you trying to get better at? And what's most important to you in your learning trajectory today, and what's your relationship with the students like? And to watch what happens to those kinds of students, not to mention quote unquote regular students who don't have all of the problems with socioeconomic class or being racially marginalized or having a disability or learning differences. Watching both of those sorts of subsets of students absolutely on fire in personalized competency-based learning environments, and then going up, I was like, really? And then going to another place and watching it, and another place and watching it. Once I saw what that happened, and I watched what teachers how they fell in love with their kids, they fell in love with their curriculum, they fell in love with their school, they fell in love with their community when they started to do these things. I turned on that stuff because I saw it happen. I need to see it in order to believe it. Once I saw it, now I believe it. And then I started to read the research and I wanted to watch it happen. And I came around to it. But I want to say, PCBL is not the magic, personalized competency-based learning is not the magic bullet here. I'm also a big believer in problem-based learning and project-based learning, expeditionary learning, universal design for learning, individualized learning plans. If you look at Harvard's success planning work, if you look at UConn's school-wide enrichment models, if you look at Spring Point's academic conferencing, if you look at the new teacher projects, learning acceleration for all, and different manifestations of blended learning and flipped classrooms, and workplace apprenticeship programs, and mentoring and tutoring programs, and early college, high schools, and acceleration enrichment for all of these are proven methods that don't rely on segregation to claim that they're meeting all students' needs, right? All of those particular approaches don't start with the assumption that if some kids don't want to learn, or if kids are struggling, they need to be over here. No. When kids are struggling, they need extra scaffolds and extra supports in mainstream environments. And we will never get there as long as what we understand to be pedagogy, instruction, assessment, and classroom management to be one teacher in charge as an independent contractor in a classroom by themselves with little meaningful professional development over a 30-plus year career, and basically zero accountability for doing anything other than being a warm body. We're never going to get there as long as teacher education produces teachers with that expectation of what the job looks like. And unions, and I'm a former union president, and district administration and leadership and our own cultures within schools allow that kind of beliefs about what teaching looks like to persist. You can't differentiate instruction in those kinds of environments. We have to change the culture of schools. We have to change what it means and looks like to be a teacher, which isn't sit and get and deliver. It's creating learning opportunities that builds on the assets and funds of knowledge of all of your students and takes them to the next level. That's partly where you know that they need to go, and also partly where they want and need to go. And there's always that negotiation. And all of the list of methods and approaches that I just listed off start with that foundation, particularly when they're undertaken with a rich, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, culturally responsive, and sustaining lens. Without those lenses, you can take the best cool magic bullet that you think you found out there. You're going to put it into a system, and I'm going to say pathways, and you're going to say, oh, cool, pathways means Johnny's going here and Janie's going over here. Like, no, that's not what we mean by pathways, right? Or when I say things like pacing, oh, that means, oh, Johnny's a slow reader or a slow learner, so Johnny's going to be in the blue group and Janie's going to be in the yellow group. No. But pathways and pacing within rigorous and responsive and anti-racist and justice-oriented PCBL become all sorts of routes and opportunities and enrichment within heterogeneous democratic classrooms, and all kids get to flourish. Changes the nature of the conversation with the teacher. It changes the nature of the teacher's relationship with the community. It changes the notion of what pedagogy looks like and should look like. Classroom management gets easier. Kids come to you. They don't ask you questions about how do I get an A. They ask you, how can I get better at this? How can I get to this level of proficiency on this thing? Because I keep stumbling here. What strategy should I be using to get better here? Oh my God, how good of a question is that from a student, right? You're never going to get that with grading and ranking and sorting. You're going to get kids who want to play the grading, ranking, and sorting game, and they want to know it because they know the trinkets are the name of the game. We got to quit it with the trinkets and create real reading, real liberatory learning environments that are based on a lot of the things. And I believe PCBL is a really great one because I've seen it, but it's among a whole menu of other really great options that are proven and being used around the country.
I'm loving this conversation. I'm absolutely loving this conversation. We got to quit it with the trinkets. Dr. Toshalis bringing the heat, bringing the hot fire, to use a scientific academic terminology here. And I know folks are listening right now or watching this video who want to be part of this change in their own school or their own district, but they know, like I'm sure you know, that the resistance to that will be very, very, very strong, very, very, very fierce. Whenever it comes to embarking on systemic change, cultural change, whenever it comes to expanding opportunities, especially for the most marginalized, the resistance shows up, and it shows up in a very big and strong way. And a lot of the resistance, a lot of the folks out there, you know, they might say that they're down for all this. This all sounds fantastic, but my kid is super advanced, and when my kid was in their math class with the previous teacher, they weren't learning nothing, and I love where they're at now. I don't want my kid to have to I don't want their education to be quote unquote watered down for the sake of somebody else. And, you know, we hear all those arguments. I'm sure you're very familiar with all those arguments. So how do you advise schools and districts that wish to get started and embark on this journey of all that you've discussed in terms of getting rid of the trinkets and getting rid of these inequitable systems? How does one get started in today's context in their own school or their own district?
One is prepare for the backlash, because it's coming, because it always does. For as long as we have been a nation and as long as we have tried to educate, quote unquote, all of our students, and I'm not sure we're still a nation that is fully committed to educating all of our students. I think that's the reason why tracking exists. See my previous points. But as long as we continue to try to do that, there will be forces and commitments and communities that want to make sure that schools are designed to secure advantage for some. And schools are designed that way. They're perfectly designed to yield the outcomes that they produce. That's why if we want to change the outcomes, we have to change the design. And I'm borrowing from Tony Breik and the Carnegie Institute and his Learning to Improve rationale there, which has a really great outline for what continuous improvement can look like in schools, particularly when it's justice oriented. And there are some very specific things that I would suggest. One is prepare for the backlash, because it always happens. It happened in Brown v. Board. It happens when we see uprisings with Lemon Grove in San Diego, and when we see the student walkouts with the Chicana rights that in the 60s and 70s. And it happens whenever we see situations where the system is trying to live out the rhetoric that we're actually trying to reach and teach all kids. And how do we do that? We position site and district leaders who have the expertise, who have the fortitude and have the spine to stand up to disinformation and racism. And we put people and elect people onto school boards to make sure that they're there to basically serve as an umbrella for superintendents when they're brave enough to go there. And then we get impacted parents to get mobilized, and we use evidence and research to do that. And then we have enough people who are in positions of power that they won't cave in when they're faced with the backlash, and they won't move to the middle in order to appease a few people who are basically entertaining a supremacist orientation to what schools should be. And let me just give you like a thought experiment about that. Like, imagine if a school established an extra special track for some kids that offered a host of extra resources and opportunities, really robust mentoring and real world experiences, extra field trips, the best and most experienced teachers, not the new ones right out of teacher education, but the ones who've really proven that they know how to run a good classroom and kids are inspired in those spaces. They use the most rigorous forms of classroom instruction and the highest regarded materials and curricula. And it's only the only kids who are allowed into that track are kids who have demonstrated that they can speak at least 2 languages, that they identify as multicultural, which, as we know through research and science, actually creates a more sophisticated neurobiological structure in the brain and allows more sophisticated and competent and complicated thinking processes to come more quickly versus those who are monocultural. So there's good scientific reasons why we would prioritize multilingual students and those who are multicultural. And those kids were also skilled at a narrow set of very clear skills, and we're testing for them, such as creativity, collaboration, the ability to solve problems. And they were measured on a test that was built only by Black and brown people and administered to students in the 3rd grade. Okay, and students in this track were nominated for being considered for taking that test for all this cool stuff only by Black and brown, or almost exclusively by Black and brown teachers. Now, would white upper middle class parents claim that this gifted kind of program was unfair, discriminatory, and harmful to their kids? You damn right they would be. They'd be out of their minds that program was exclusionary, unfair, and reverse racism and all of that. And yet that's exactly what we have. So we need to do a better job at messaging in diverse communities and even in white dominant communities about what we're actually doing, and show the evidence that taking away GATE does not harm the highest performing students when acceleration enrichment opportunities are provided for everyone. And I would push people to go to the statutes in your state. Look at what it says about gifted and talented education. Almost without exception across the United States, it says that gifted and talented services shall be provided for identified students, and that districts have to do that identification process, and it's up to them. It does not say that those programs have to be provided exclusively or that they have to be exclusionary. It says that they have to be provided. Much like special education and the movement for full inclusion, there's no reason legally why we can't offer those programs for everyone, why someone couldn't be enriched and accelerated no matter what their background is and what their interest may be, because they're put in a heterogeneous classroom where those opportunities are provided for all. How do we get teachers there? That's professional development, that's research, that's bold leadership. Now, I'm saying all of this, and I have to say, the little devil on my shoulder is reminding me right now, yeah, Toshalis, but you don't really trust institutions, do you? And I don't. I particularly don't trust dominant institutions, and schools are one of them. And so I have to say, I have the greatest hope for making this change, not by waiting around for what is largely a set of white dominant teachers, white dominant administrators who are committed to tracking because it benefited them. They liked school. School worked for them. If they were identified as that, they went in and did. I know it. I was a gifted and talented teacher. I got the extra special sauce because I thought I was the extra special sauce. And then I woke up and looked at the fact that I was teaching all the white kids near UC Santa Barbara and the Asian kids who were all sons and daughters of professors and working in the defense industry, and all of the brown and poor and lower socioeconomic and emerging bilingual kids were at the other end of the school being taught by brand new teachers being churning through every 2 years when a new recruit would come in and get burned out and leave, right? I was part of that system. So we need to change some of that system, but we can't convince ourselves that it's going to work unless we mobilize parents and mobilize students. Student walkouts are very effective when they're done in a nonviolent way and they use the media really effective. Parents that form their own family unions or parent unions, not the PTA. PTA typically is not a very radical organization. It's often very moderating organization, typically not very, and there's lots of scholarship about this. But when they form their own parent union and agitate for changes and change the political winds so that the politicians who are trustees and the politicians who are superintendents realize that it's no longer comfortable for them to continue to say, we believe in the all kids and rhetoric about this and equity about that, but they don't actually make any changes. We have to mobilize parents. We have to mobilize students to make it uncomfortable for people to continue with the status quo. And then one last point, we have to recognize that for those who think that taking away gate means that you're going to be ruining their kids' lives, we have to supply evidence that that's not the case, and it's out there. There's plenty of that to show that. And we also need to make the claim all the time that equity always feels like theft to those who are accustomed to unearned advantage. If we're not able to have tough conversations in communities about how we participate in racist and oppressive systems and move people along into that greater awareness and greater commitments to equity and justice, then no matter how much we mobilize, we're going to be coming up against that brick wall of white entitlement and white fragility that will keep us from ever making those changes. So it's a chore. It can be done. It has been done. Burris has written about it in her book, De-Tracking for Equity, and she's got multiple articles about there. Kevin Wellner, Daniel Lozen have written about it. Jeannie Oakes has written about it. And there's lots of communities around the country who have successfully detracked either portions of their school or all of their school. It can be done.
Well, Dr. Eric Toshalis, you've given us a tremendous amount to think about today, and I think as an evangelist for the cause, you you made a great case today. I think I still have lots of questions and stuff I'd love to, dig in deeper with you. So I think that just means at some point we'll have to have you back for another conversation. But thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciated having you here on All the Above.
Guys, it's an honor to be part of the conversation with you. And again, huge props for continuing to push the envelope and inform communities and take what's been given to you and do really beautiful things with it. I can't wait to hear what you guys do next. And welcome the invitation to come back anytime. And thanks for having me on.
All right. Dr. Eric Toshalis, we'll have some links below, everybody, for some of Dr. Toshalis's writings. If you'd like to learn more about what he is writing about and is up to in his exciting work. That's it for today's seminar, folks. Thanks for joining us. But stick around. Next up is today's Class Dismissed. All right, folks, we've come to that time in our episode where we like to pause for a moment, step back, do a little reflecting, and share some love and send some flowers to people out there doing great things in the world of education. It's our Class Dismissed. We always end our episode this way. And Manuel, what good news do we have to celebrate today?
Yeah, well, we have a pretty good story coming out of the world's #1 public university, Jeff. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the #1 public university in the world.
UC Berkeley? Is that what we got?
No, they used to be for many years, and they rubbed it in our face for a long time. But no, they're #2 now. #1 public university in the world, of course, being UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. And I remember when I was an undergrad student there were different things that people would say about the acronym UCLA and what it actually stood for. One of those was under construction. Literally always, because always there's construction going on. And this story is the culmination of years of construction at UCLA, which has now provided the opportunity for UCLA to become the first campus in the University of California system to guarantee housing for students for 4 years. All right. Now, when I was an undergrad at UCLA, you got 2 years. Like you had 2 years in the dorms, then you had to find somewhere else to live because there was no room for you because incoming freshmen obviously coming in. So it was like 2 years and then you are on your own. And for those who aren't familiar, UCLA is not located in a cheap area. Like it's expensive housing around UCLA. To the north of UCLA, like right across the street to the north is Bel Air. To the east of UCLA is Beverly Hills, to the west is Brentwood, and to the south is just the rest of West LA, which is a pretty high price area. So UCLA has long had housing challenges, and after years and years of construction on any available spot of land that they had, UCLA now has enough dorms, enough beds for all of its students, incoming freshmen, to be able to stay in campus housing for all 4 years, and for transfer students to remain in campus housing for 2 years. Now, it's not free housing. Wish it was, and it should be. It's not free housing though, but it is on average about 30% below market rates. So it's more affordable, or closer in the direction of affordable. Let's put it that way. It's closer in the direction of affordable than the off-campus apartments around there and all that. Now, I lived in an off-campus apartment with hell of roommates to try to collectively make that rent, and it was fun, good times. But I am happy for incoming UCLA Bruins who now don't have the pressure of having to find a place after the 2 years, which is what me and my friends had. So yeah, pretty good.
Yeah. Now, I love this story, Manuel, and I think we actually need to do much, much more of this kind of thing across our higher ed system. I would even argue in the 2-year context to really think about investing in campus-based housing as a part of what is an ingredient of success for students at the higher ed level. So props to UCLA for making this happen. A little late in the game, perhaps, because Dr. Russ didn't get to take advantage of this, but better late than never, I suppose. And so real happy for the students at UCLA that get a little bit of relief from those crazy West Side prices, man. This was wild out there, the rental market. So congrats to them.
Yeah, for sure. It is wild out there. For sure. And for those, some folks might be listening or watching who went to schools elsewhere that just had plenty of space to build plenty of housing for their students. That's not UCLA's case. Highly constrained, like I said, geographically by the areas around it. And I think it's also the smallest UC acreage-wise. So if they could do it, I think the rest of the UCs and Cal States could probably do it as well. So hopefully we see some movement in that direction. But that is that, folks. All right, folks, it's been a fantastic episode chock full of stories about education funding, juvenile schools, detracking, campus housing, all of that here in one episode of All of the Above. Shout out to those of you who are still listening. And if you have not yet given that thumbs up or that 5-star review, we would very, very much appreciate it. And as always, AOTAshow.com has all of the things, all of the links, all the past episodes, all the extras, how you can support, all that good stuff. And also beneath this episode, you can see all the links to today's stories and links to check out more from our guests and all of that. All right, all that for y'all because we love y'all, AOTA family. All right, so we'll see you next week.